Probably a short call on this bill, really on behalf of my colleague David Clendon, who I know is looking forward to speaking on this matter. The Green Party has taken quite an assertive stance in this House on the issues that have arisen around the serial collapse of many of our financial institutions during the course of the recession, and on some of the practices that came to light and weaknesses that came to light as a result of scrutiny of those occurrences. And I think it's probably fair to say that what I have to say tonight dovetails very well with what we've just heard from the Honourable David Parker. The recession, sir, saw financial institutions collapsing like dominoes through New Zealand, starving good businesses of capital, and resulting for many investors in wreaking havoc in their savings, including the life savings of many New Zealanders. And so that's conservatively estimated at several $1 billion of wealth simply wiped from the collective balance sheets of New Zealanders. The problem, sir, is that in the good times, the mark-to-market process serves to imbue the balance sheets of all with a rosy glow. That results in less scrutiny, greater risk-taking, as Honourable David Parker has just been discussing, and effectively creating wealth out of nothing. And so that then sets up positive feedback loops that seem to inflate the apparent value of those assets still further, which then creates greater risk-taking, and the whole thing spirals out of control until it doesn't anymore, until it collapses, sir. And I'm constantly reminded of the treatment of Iceland by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who less than a year before the total collapse of Iceland's economy was lauding Iceland as one of the greatest success stories in the world economy. Since everything has gone south, sir, there has been much greater scrutiny of these investment vehicles and of the things that went wrong. And some of the things that went wrong have already been discussed in the House, but here's my little list. One of the things we discovered, sir, was that many of the schemes being operated were no more than Ponzi schemes. We've discovered, sir, many shonky practices, such as when a debt was going bad, it was not being repaid, rather than having that bad debt appearing on the balance sheet, it simply was being rolled into a new debt. And so that actually made the balance sheet look still better. We also saw the practice of immediately prior to balance date, companies with bad debts that would otherwise have appeared on their books, selling those debts off to other entities, many of which were related parties. I agree with David Parker's assessment that was certainly one of the most shameful practices that we saw from these companies, only to days after the balance date have those same assets sold back to the original entity, and many other practices such as those. I think what we saw from that was a whole series of practices that made the inquiry into financial institutions something that the Green Party wholeheartedly supported, sir. We saw a cynical use of moratoria, and this may well be something that my colleague John Boscawen wants to talk about in his contribution, because it's one of the things that he has very valiantly and admirably, in my view, pursued in this House and in the Select Committee. We saw what I would call active deceit and inappropriate disclosure and inappropriate marketing. And so I've reminded the House previously of the report of the Morningstar Group that found that New Zealand ranked absolute bottom of all of the countries that it assessed for investor friendliness. And the reason that we ranked the bottom was because of our inappropriate and inadequate disclosure and regulatory regimes. And most importantly, in relation to this bill, what we saw was inadequate scrutiny by those trusted with that task. And I use that word trust because this business of trustee companies and official trustees is not simply a role. It's actually a duty that has a fundamental contract with investors. Investors have a right to trust that trustees will actually be looking after their interests. And in many cases, sir, they did not. I lost count, sir, of the number of these financial companies that collapsed through this time, and I think I lost count when it hit about 50. And again, John Biscowen may well have an up-to-date number. So I guess we then come to what the progress of the government has been in actually dealing with all of those inadequacies that became manifest. There's a Leonard Cohen lyric that goes, sail on, oh mighty ship of state, which refers to the terrible momentum that the state has. And I guess we saw a little bit of that, where measures that were proposed, in fact, before the recession hit, still came into this House. And the Green Party was highly critical of the Securities Disclosure and Financial Advisors Amendment Bill because in the face of this absolutely apparent inadequacy of the disclosure regime, the government moved to relax the disclosure requirements, and we opposed that. But since that time, sir, the government has unveiled an agenda of measures to deal with some of the inadequacies of the disclosure and regulatory regimes, and the Green Party has been pleased to support those. We've been pleased to support, for example, the inquiry into the collapse of finance companies, and I know the issue of Leanne Dalziel's members' bill has come up in this House tonight, and I pledged the support of our party to that members' bill, to a members' bill that actually will short-circuit the attempts to rob investors in the ANZ and ING frozen funds from their legitimate and moral legal remedies. It's disgraceful behaviour on the part of those companies, and I applaud Leanne Dalziel's attempts to block off that sneaky escape route that they intended to pursue. In relation to this bill, sir, we'll be voting for it at first reading. We note the concerns that Labor has raised around this, and to those I also add our caution that we wish to check with some of the smaller institutions like credit unions and similar institutions to check that this bill will not have unintended consequences for those institutions that in general do a fantastic job for New Zealanders. But with that proviso, sir, we look forward to the scrutiny of the bill at Select Committee, and we look forward to the greater protection for New Zealand investors that they so richly deserve.